Hello, everyone. So since today's guest comes from France, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a blooper in a sign in a Paris hotel elevator, which said very simply in English, "Please leave your values at the front desk." So with that, today's guest is Cecile Israel. Cecile has an extensive experience and background in international business and marketing, especially in the hospitality and food and beverage sector. She started her studies and career in hospitality, evolving in strategic management. She is today just back to her native country, France, after 6 years in China, where she launched her own company, Easy Bacchus, combining wine marketing and tech, and she is known as Ceci The Wine Lady. She later joined an exciting food tech company with Epper Market Group, where she led the marketing development over South China. She was also during that time president of La French Tech, a strong international tech network. Welcome, Cecile. Delighted that you have joined us today.
Hi, Philip. Thank you so much for having me today and for that great opportunity. And I'm really excited to share about my path.
Sounds great. Well, let's start with your background. What
Sure.
motivated you to get into the hospitality and the food and beverage business? And then how did you get to China?
Very interesting one. So actually, I think hospitality is a world of passion. And actually have been passionated by hospitality and tourism, but very early, actually when I was only 15 years old. And I wanted to join the hospitality school, but my family didn't want. So I really had to fight to enter into hospitality school in Paris. So I was back 15 years old, and I did it. And it has been a really wonderful experience when I learned how to cook, how to serve, of course, all the sides of management, as well wine. That really became a strong passion for me. But at that time, and that will be interesting for the next step of my journey, I really disliked the way it was taught at school because it was really complex. Actually, teachers were using very elitist and traditional and very technical words. And even in the market, as France, which was supposed to be, the French market where people know about wine, it was still very difficult to pick a bottle of wine. Anyway, at that time, I continued my path on my hospitality studies. I worked already at that time every summers in many hotels, including famous hotels in Paris, in kitchen, in restaurant, and so on, and then into management levels. I continued my path up until MBA at the ESSEC Business School, and in between, I spent a year in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai with Hyatt in finance, and then I worked with Starwood hotel groups that now belongs to Marriott as revenue manager, which was very interesting because you have to analyze a lot about figures because your final goal is to optimize room revenue. And at the same time, it's a lot about communication, and all that, background helped me a lot then when I opened my venture, and a lot about, of course, how to elaborate the right strategy at the right time. And I was finally, quite comfortable in my life. I always had that wine idea since I was 16 years old of making wine more accessible for everyone. I was particularly looking about US market and Chinese market, but my idea was more about some gamification. So China market was very interesting. And at that time, it was supposed to become the second market worldwide. And very lucky as well in my personal life, my husband had a work proposition to go over China. So we just took the plane together back in 2016 and landed up in the south of China in Shenzhen. So it's a very, very dynamic business cities known as the hub of hardware because you have a lot of factories. It's very close to Hong Kong and it's located in the Guangdong province. So I opened my company and the goal was to make wine more accessible. So I had a lot of marketing background and as well strong interest, and of course wine. And I benefited of Shenzhen ecosystem to use tech to leverage wine marketing tools. So the first project that I initiated was the production of some very specific wine labels where you could actually scratch and smell the wine main aromas.
Wow.
Then you could touch how the wine will be in your mouth. So whether it will be soft, strong, or picky for sparkling wine. Then you could see as well some food suggestion and scan, because of course in China, people scan daily dozens of time and get more information. So it was a B2B project, very innovative. I got 3 patents, and it was literally very hard hard and easy because Shenzhen has so many factories, and project development is literally very, very fast in comparison, for instance, with France. But still it was difficult because I didn't speak a word of Chinese at that time. And so I found the right factories, got able to produce my labels as well without budget, find way to get it with the patents, and as well start the commercial development. I had to pivot it at some time because the market fit was not ideal. So I started to initiate mobile application, we say in Chinese mobile app, using augmented reality, because at that time, China was really more advanced in terms of new technologies, especially virtual reality and augmented reality. But as well, I made some mistake working as well with remote team, not friendly with all software that were used in China, and it needed a lot of cash. So at that time, I started to do some wine events just to get some cash to finance actually my my mobile application development. But we know often in business, we say that it's customers, it's the market that drives the project. And actually that's what happened. The events really took up and get more and more famous. And I always thought it was, the technical stuff that was needed, that was key in my business. But actually everything that I wanted to do with augmented reality, I just did it myself, So of course I created a set of unique wine experience using a lot of games, using my wine labels and so on. It was really particular. And I started with individuals, people, and then I get to know. So I started to expand to corporates, business, and then some even brands noticed me. Of course, I did as well some self-branding, and I started some brand collaboration. And then after the events, people told me, oh, I love your wine. I love your recommendation. I trust you, so on, because wine as well, we have a lot of counterfeit wine. So a lot of fraud in wine. We could develop that maybe later. So the recommendation aspect and trust is really important in the wine choice. So people ask me, how can I buy your wine? Sure.
Let me stop you for a moment. You said counterfeit wine? What is
right.
wine? I've never heard of
So
that.
different stuff. It can be the label, which is incorrect. So let's say that we will put the label of a very fancy wine, but actually it's just regular wine. That's the best case. And the worst case could be just a mix of wine and water, maybe some plum juice, sorry. And then they can add it as well some chemical elements that can make you literally very, very sick. So it can be very dangerous. And you can find counterfeit wine as well in supermarkets.
Is that only in China? I've never heard of that in the United States or in Europe.
It happens in some markets, but a lot in Asia and especially in China.
Wow.
So that was literally something very, very important. And I educate a lot about that, how to choose wine, so on. But of course, once people, trust you, it's like I just became a local influencer. So people just wanted my recommendation. So then I was forced to actually launch my marketplace. So I was using WeChat. I just started to launch my own marketplace, and of course doing a lot of content, creating community, engaging, a lot of inbound marketing, so on. COVID arrived, and of course, hit us a lot with less events, as events were, most of my revenue. So I had to pivot again more online. and start more e-learning, trying to expand in different markets and so on, until the moment when the hypermarket group reached me and just purchased a warehouse in Shenzhen. So it was a food delivery company that was specialized that time, not for Chinese people, but for expats. So they were buying premium imported food for expats from different countries, mainly Europe and North America, for expats to bring the taste of home with very high quality and a very large offer with more than 8,000 products. So they were based in Shanghai. They just purchased a warehouse in South China in Shenzhen and wanted to expand, and have been recruited there to lead the marketing, communication, and development side. So that time I was, my main customers were expats, and all about marketing, how to develop strong acquisition strategy, retention, how to keep loyal your customer, and of course, brand exposure. So it has been a very diverse experience.
Sure, that sounds fascinating. I want to explore some of the themes that you talked about.
Sure.
One of the issues that you mentioned is that you have 3 patents. Western companies are very afraid of entering the China market because they will lose their intellectual property.
Right.
How did you protect yourself against essentially someone stealing from you?
So it will, so IP in China is more important than it has been, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. Okay.
IP.
So now there is still a conscience. Okay. People are more aware about IP and so on. But still, for me, what is key and still key today is the time to market. You have to go first in the market and you have to create a strong brand, because if you have a strong brand, then you will have built, a story behind, you will have brand effect, you will have a community that you know how to engage, that are behind you, that are with you, and that, nothing, can happen to you. So it's still important, but time to market remains key. And as well, IP in China is more expensive. That I'm not sure about the US side, but at least if I compare to French side, IP is much more expensive into China.
I'm sorry, and what are you talking about is more extensive in China? The time to market or the
time to market? Yeah, no, time to market is definitely more important. You have to be first in your market and create branding, a strong brand.
It's fascinating. What are some similarities between business practices in China versus France?
I will say that first, there are more differences than similarities.
Let's talk
Actually,
about whatever you would like to do first, differences or similarities.
I will maybe talk first about the differences. First, for me in China, business relied on what we call Guanxi. So Guanxi is a kind of, if I will have to say a word in English, it will be network, but it's much more intense. It's a network where people, become your friends, your family, and trust is really the main element in that relationship. So build strong relationship, the Guanxi with strong and authentic relationship. For example,
Excuse
when
me,
we do business,
Guanxi is also translated as connections. It's the
yeah,
relationship.
it's connection. But it's really a very close relationship. Okay, it's like what we say in business is like we call each other brother, sister, best friend, so on. So it's really have that that close relationship that we don't have in France. Like in France, I'm doing business, I will never call someone bro, sister, and so on. I will keep a certain distance. No, it's everything is mixed in China. Business, family is all mixed together. So, for example, when you do business, before going to the order and sell with a potential supplier, you always spend time with that person, often in restaurants. So you go in different outings with with that person. And what is as well very famous is KTV, so the karaoke's, where you sing and drink a lot of alcohol. And sometimes even you have to drink a lot of alcohol to show your vulnerability to the other person. So it's really a deep relationship that you need to make with that person. And the power of Guanxi is that it lasts over time. um, Someone help you, or just to connect, it's fine, they will give you money and they don't care. But 10 years later, they can come to you, and ask you something. And that's, always a balanced relationships where you can help that person if needed. So it has more trust element and long-term elements, and as well more authentic and close ship side.
Mm.
Then another element is that, of course, you have contract nowadays, but contract is not the most important. The word, like, so back as well to the Guanxi, the relationship with the person is much more important. And as well, you can sign a document, but signing won't have an effect. The stamp only of the company is the signature allowed. You can have stamp and signature, but without stamp, no paper will have any legal value in China. So I know that a lot of foreign companies want to have, they want to protect themselves. So they arrive, they try to do business, and contract is so important. But no, you have to be there and establish a relationship with supplier. So that's one of the, I would say, most important elements. Then something as well very different in business is that for me, Chinese are much more pragmatic. They don't think, okay? They can do, and in a very short, timely manner, comparing to France, and I will say Occident in general. I know that now I'm back in France. I see a lot of my friends that spend hours of meetings a day. Sometimes they have more than 10 meetings a day. That really, astonished me really a lot. And in China, no. In China, you have something happen, so you just try. That test and learn approach that a startup should have is definitely present everywhere in China. And speaking about as well more pragmatic, it just make me think about the factory. You have to be very precise when you produce something. For example, if I say I want a fancy wine label that will match the New Year's. Let's say this 2023 year coming in China is the year of rabbit. So just make a rabbit design, so on. They won't know what to do. So you literally, if you want to have something, and it's really important, especially you have a tech element, you really have to be very, very, very precise, more than what you will do, for example, in France.
So must you have a designer? For example, do you have a graphic designer on your staff?
I did. When I had my company, I definitely did. And all the design proof and we literally all measured everything about the material as well and so on. And it was really, really important to do so.
Very interesting. How did you determine success in your Chinese venture? Was it by market share or profitability or receptivity or something else?
But then success, is very subjective. For me, having an impact in the way people were discovering wine and educate people about wine, because everything about when you buy a product in China is linked to branding. And for me, wine is not only branding, it's about discovering your own taste, so on. So then we can develop that later as well if you want, talking about how people buy wine and how Chinese consumers differs to French one. But for me, having that impact was literally the key measure of success. And of course, revenue as well. I needed to sustain. I'm making a business, so I needed money to sustain. But I will say more generally, all notoriety effect. Having a strong brand that people know is something very important in China if you want to sustain. Because if you are not known, people don't trust you.
Right.
So it's a bit paradoxal, but it's really linked, into Chinese mindset. The brand needs to be known. I need to see it in social media. We need to talk about that brand, and then I can trust. Or I need to see some influencers, and then we can talk as well about the power of social media and social commerce, and then I can follow their recommendation.
Yeah, very interesting also. In terms of the wine itself or the grapes, did you import them from Australia or New Zealand? Where did the grapes come from?
Are you speaking about the wine that are produced in China or the wine
Yes.
that I was distributing?
Were you producing wine and distributing or just producing?
I was distributing wine, but I was not importing myself. The great thing is that I was buying stock from the first big importers that arrived from abroad to China. So it helped me to don't have any import taxes, and as well don't have any stock to handle and so on. So it was very smart in terms of business.
So the importers would import wine and then would you change it or put your own label on it, or was it someone else's wine? How did that work?
My label was actually an additional wine label, so it didn't change anything about the primary wine label. It was just a marketing tool in addition of the first wine label.
And so was the wine owned by another company, for example, and then you relabeled it?
Not relabel it. The thing is that in China, you have the primary wine label that say, for instance, it's a Pinot Noir from California. And then on the back, you have the Chinese wine label where you have where the importer puts all legal information. In order to sell wine in China, you have to put specific information in Chinese. And then, yes, the name of the wine importer will show up at the end. But anyway, it's a B2B business, so it's extremely complicated for individual customers to buy wine from them. And then on top of the bottle, so bottleneck or on the side, I had my wine label,
Very
which was more marketing and testing wine label.
Yes, definitely. What other key elements might determine success in the wine business?
So I will say branding. Branding in wine is really important because it's totally normal. China, I mean, is now a big producer of wine and we have amazing wine, but consumers don't know about wine. They really neophyte in terms of wine. So when people don't know a product, branding remains key. So they need to buy a brand. So it will be big companies that invested a lot. And for example, the very famous one is Penfolds, which was the Australian wine owned by Treasury Wine Estates, one of the biggest Australian wine company. I say was because there was some anti-dumping stories, and now Australian wine bottles are currently forbidden to be sold in China. But for example, another brand is actually it's funny to say brand is that Bordeaux. Bordeaux wines became so famous that it's a region in France, but it became a brand. So that kind of reference is very important for Chinese customers. If they don't know, it will be very hard for them to buy unless, and then that's where we come up to social media. One of the influencer recommend them, and then they can follow the recommendation.
You mentioned an Australian company or an Australian wine. Could you say that name?
Yes. Yeah, the brand is Penfolds, and it's owned by
How do you spell it?
TWE.
Sorry, can you spell it?
Yeah, it's PENFOLDS, Penfolds, and it's owned by TWE, so Treasury Wine Estates. And actually, at that time, before the anti-dumping story, Penfolds represented 30% of their revenue.
Wow.
In China. Yeah. So it has been crazy from one day to another. They have been shut down. And I mean, all Australian wine. But that benefited, of course, to French wines that took over the first place in terms of market share. But yeah, it's a big war in the wine business.
I think you're referring to that the Chinese government basically banned a lot of Australian imports because of
Yeah, right.
with Australia, right?
Yeah, there were and has been a lot of elements that were combined at that time, but the main story was it was an anti-dumping case. So Chinese thought that Australians were selling at a cost which was less than the production cost just to be able to sell into Chinese market.
And do you feel that was true, or was it an invented excuse, or you don't know?
I really don't know. And I think there was a lot of different elements that were combined together, political elements and economic elements as well. The only result is that right now they have to reinvent it themselves. They have to, and actually, you know, they did because they find a way to purchase some vineyard in China and create wine now produced in China.
Oh, fascinating. I did not know that China grew its own wine. I had no idea they had its
So
own.
they do, and actually, you know, more than half of the consumption is dominated by local wines.
Oh,
We always think about imported wine because
right.
that's what we see, you know, in supermarket. And you know that's only, you know, the big cities so on. But what makes most of the wine consumption in China is local wine, and then we have really bad quality wine. But we have amazing ones, especially in two areas, in Ningxia and on Shandong province. And I really saw as well a difference in tasting from, you know, the day I arrived and 6 years after. The quality increased a lot, and I will be really interested to see, you know, in like 5-10 years time from now, how the wine market will evolve, and especially, you know, selling overseas.
Yes. And are the Chinese selling their excellent wines overseas? I've never seen
So
any shops here.
a bit. So it's then because it's a B2B circuit. It's a B2B contract with only exclusive distributors, but it's not easy to find. But we can still find some. You know, yeah, and it costs quite a lot actually. Even in buying in China, those very good wines cost $500 a bottle because
Whoa.
it's it's very expensive to produce, but for different reasons. The first one is that the climate is very hard, so they need more water to irrigate the soil. Then everything is made manually because of the climate, and it's not straight, so they are not using a lot of machines. So everything is picked manually, and all the big machinery actually to produce wine in the vineyard, they have to buy that from abroad. They are not producing it right now, so as well it increases the cost of producing wine. And finally, within the same vineyards, in the different alleys, you know, usually in countries you have, okay, all that side is Pinot Noir, all that side is Chardonnay, and sometimes they are really different from one range to another range in China. So it requires a lot as well of different treatments, and then when you mix the different grapes, so all in all it costs a lot to produce, and that's why even local wine sometimes cost more than very good imported wine.
Fascinating. Um, in terms of when you were there, basically running a company or running your enterprise, how would you describe the management styles between Chinese companies and French companies?
Mm. So I had more experience in management on my last journey, which was hypermarket, because when I was with my own company, Zibacus, I was solo entrepreneur and was working only in freelance and only with one local hire. The other ones were based in different countries. But in my previous experience, I had a few people, local people to manage. And yes, it's definitely different. I will say, for example, in France, the management is quite flexible, but of course it depends about the size of the company. For example, for startups and scale-ups, it's much more, open and using some flat hierarchy. In China, yes, it will be more traditional, more top-down approach. But if you respect all the codes of how to talk to your boss, to your manager, so on, you can still speak. Okay, it's not, you don't have you can still exchange ideas. So it's quite different. As well, as I was referring at the beginning of the podcast, in France, and I will say in many countries in Occident, people speak a lot. They speak, they make a lot of meetings and so on before able to take some decision, and it goes much faster in China. People are much more pragmatic. So okay, something don't go, we try that and then we adapt. So I really like, that side of doing business.
Very interesting. What about the marketing benefits and appeals? What elements work in the Chinese market? For example, is it colors, or is it symbols, or some other ways to attract Chinese customers besides the influences that you mentioned?
Yes, no, definitely. The design and the wording will be important. So speaking about design, of course, some colors attract a lot Chinese consumers, like red. Red colors is associated to luck. So it will be lucky and so on. Then according to the as well the year of the Chinese calendar where we are at, the design could evolve. For example, this year will be the year of the rabbit. So you will have all the things linked to rabbit design, rabbit wording will definitely increase your sales potential. And all the wording as well that is really important in China, the name of the wine. So very often people change the name, adapting to something that means something positive, something that brings luck, some things that brings prosperity, that brings wealth, so on, is really important. And then in terms of design, I would say all those traditional labels in wine, with the name of the chateau written with a very old style font, will increase in terms of value. I mean, in the mindset of a Chinese customer, the wine. Whereas it's as well the wood cork. If it's what we call new world wine with the caps for Chinese consumer, even if the quality is actually better, for the Chinese consumer, it won't be.
So the
So
Chinese
having that,
want
very,
corks. The Chinese
that
want corks
traditional cork.
and
Yeah,
not the
yes.
screw caps.
Yes, yeah, they want cork. But actually, myself, sometimes I preferred caps because with cork, you have more risk to damage the wine during transportation. And as well, if the wine, if you need to age the wine, so sometimes it's even better for me to have actually caps wine. Yeah. And for example, as well, in terms of design for my wine labels, I couldn't use, for the wine aromas, I couldn't use some icons of fruits that they didn't know. For example, they don't know the mulberry or raspberry, but they know the dragon fruit. They know, what they consume. So you have to adapt as well everything to what a Chinese consumer, experience. And of course, people won't have the same way as well of tasting wine or picking wine wherever they are coming from, wherever the level of education, and as well price budget.
Very fascinating. What about pricing models in the Western world, for example? And since you're French, you certainly know about perfume. Perfume actually is costs very relatively little to produce, but the prices are charged high to create a sense of exclusivity and prestige and extremely high quality. Whereas, and of course, it's high profits for a small audience. Whereas wine can be either priced low for a mass market or priced very high to create the same sense of exclusivity. So in China, which pricing models do you use, or is it a combination?
I will say it's more a combination. So definitely something important in China is that the price will meet the value that you give to a certain product. Okay, so if it's a good one, you will have to price it, a bit up, just because Chinese consumer needs to put some high value to that product. But then you as well definitely need to check the cost. And the thing is that in terms of imported product, you have the logistic cost, and that increased a lot, especially with COVID, or the logistic,
I'm
and
sorry.
as well the import,
Excuse me. Uh,
the
with
the
what?
transportation cost,
Right, right. I thought you said
or
something.
logistic side.
I'm sorry. I thought you said something
Logistic.
before. Logistics cost.
No, yeah, logistic. So all transportation costs rose a lot, especially during COVID. And as well, when you import, for instance, wine, you have to pay taxes. And then it can be very, very high. And just to give you an idea on French wine, you have to pay something around 46 to 48% taxes.
Wow.
So it's a lot, but some countries benefit of trade agreements. And before Australia did, nowadays some that remain are Chile and as well New Zealand wines. So that will as well linked to the price points that you will give to your product. Personally, I tried always to have good value for money to my community, but the great thing is that I was distributing a low volume of wine, but as I was purchasing wine from the first importers, so the big one that were not the distributor again, just the first importer that, for example, was transporting the wine from that chateau in Bordeaux to China. And the big advantage is that I benefited from low price as well. So I could put quite reasonable margin in order to sustain and then still have a very good value for money for the end consumer.
Really interesting. Thank you. How does a Chinese wine consumer differ from a French wine consumer?
Such difference. Okay, first of all, they consume more red wine. So of course it evolves a bit.
The
Like when
Chinese consume more red wine than the French?
yes, and than Occident in general. When I arrived 6 years ago in China, they were consuming 90%, so 90, of red wine and only 10% of white, sparkling, rosé, etc. That changed a bit. Maybe it's now 80% of red wine and the rest of white, sparkling, rosé, but it's still red wine dominated. That comes from some different reasons. The first one is literally how wine is translated in Chinese is red wine. You say Hongjiu, red wine. So the new wine by the red wine, they are calling wine red wine. And if you speak about white wine, it's often associated to baijiu, which is the Chinese liquor, and definitely not a wine. So just the wording itself is very important. And as well, red wine, because Chinese don't really like to try something very cold or fresh, which is usually, white wine or sparkling wine are chilled. And Chinese consumers don't really like to try something very too cold in their mouth. So red wine is something that they just do prefer in general. Then in terms of taste, they prefer, I will say, something medium to intense with red fruits and spices aromas. So for example, all French Bordeaux, Chilean wine, or Australian wine definitely fit. And they don't really like when there is too much acidity. Okay. When they drink white wine, that really happen much more with women. They prefer something very aromatic, very fruity and sweet. Then the taste as well differs from north to south. In China, when you make marketing, you can't say I'm selling to China. No, you're selling to some kind of markets, and every province is as well very different. For example, in north, they are just, if I'm speaking about food, they are eating much more dense food, spicy food. In the south of China, they prefer lighter food. They as well prefer something more sweet. So their taste in food will be accordingly to the taste of wine that they prefer. And same for all the, I would say most of the consumer in China are located in the coastal cities of China and not much in the countryside. Actually, 1/3 of Chinese consumer are located in the Guangdong province in the South China.
Wow.
So it's really interesting to know, and more as well young consumers. And you know, if you check the forecast, actually, the consumption of wine should double by 2026, and it will be mainly driven by Generation Z, and as well millennials. So more and more young consumers. As I was saying previously, it's mostly local wines dominated, but of course, imported wine are very present. And since Australia left China, now France took over in terms of market share, followed by Chile and Italy. Actually, if you just put together France, Chile, and Italy, in terms of imported wine, it represents 70% of the market share. So it's really a lot. Yeah.
And
then how people, yeah.
France, Chile, and Italy, 70% of the imported wine or all wine? Because you said the China
imported market share. Yeah, right. Yeah. Then how people consume wine that is totally different. I will say that in France and more extensively in Occident, people enjoy wine at home as well in restaurants and often with some food. Okay. In China, wine is mainly consumed with something linked to social. So it won't be at home. It will be mainly in restaurants or hotels, events, or as a gift. You know, gifting was before the key, the first actually, the first way of purchasing wine. Now I would say it's more half between all that social consumption and gift, but definitely not at home. Of course, with COVID, it rose a bit, but in majority, wine is still consumed, you know, outside home. And then something very different is that, of course, you know, in France and in Occident, we often have one dish and then another one, so you can pair one dish with one specific wine. The thing is that in China, on the table, you sometimes have dozens of dishes that arrive at the same time. So it's really complicated to pair a wine. And of course, Chinese people don't eat a lot of sweet stuff, but still it happens, and especially in South China. So sometimes at the beginning of the meal, you have something sweet, so that will stay, you know, in your mouth because the sweet taste is quite strong. And then you move to something super light or then spicy, and then you have wine, only one that you need to find to pair. So it's a different way of consumption. And of course, people will always cheers up. I would say we gambay together. That is really important to create relationship and as well to show respect. You will always, you know, instead, like for instance, we will just cheers one or twice, you know, mainly at the beginning or at the end of the meal. In China, you will do that repeatedly, maybe 10 times during the same dinner, and as well to cheers with different person and mainly with the person that invites you, because you have to show respect. So it's really important.
So you're
So
talking
all that
about
social aspect.
toasting. When you say cheers, you're talking about toasting in English. Gambé.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And say gambé as well when you drink it. And so gambé comes from baijiu. So usually when you gambé baijiu, you have to drink all at once, but it's really a small quantity of wine.
Sorry, gambé comes from what?
With the baijiu, the Chinese liquor that I was mentioning previously. Right. So it's very strong. So that's why we only serve a small quantity, but then you have to drink, you know, at once everything. So for wine as well. So this is as well the reason why when we serve wine, we only serve small quantity by small quantities. We're literally different of what we know in France. Yeah, in the West. Yeah, more generally in the West. And then something totally different is how so people buy wine. So I mentioned a lot the power of social media, the influencers that literally over TikTok and all the other social media like Xiaohongshu and so on do some live streaming and sell thousands of wines in minutes. So it's incredible. Um, People are more and more buying wine online. Now I will say 30% of consumers are buying wine online. This is huge, and that increased as well with COVID. And if you compare it in the West, that number is only around 10, 12% max. So it's really huge in China that 30% of overall wine purchase is made online. Then on trade, of course, supermarkets still are still present, but online will develop and continue to develop with the power of social media and influencers. And it's as well very interesting because you have some global influencers that sell many kind of products and work with different brands from fashion, clothing to wine. And you as well have some specific wine targeted, wine driven influencers that are only specialized of creating content about wine and selling wine. And you have one that is called Lady Penguin, very, very known in China. And she's, for example, specialized in wine. And I don't have I don't know by heart what she did in revenue last year, but it's definitely more than what will do a good wine importer. So it's really crazy to see how online, live streaming and sales is now dominating the wine market.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
No, I will say that my experience in China has been really amazing. I had as well much more opportunities that what I will have been able to do if I will have stayed in France. Of course, you create your own opportunities, but I really think it's a wonderful country. And if I will have to sum up one word that I learn and practice still today is adaptability.
Adaptability. Yes,
Yeah.
it's fascinating. Well, thank you so much, Ceci. This has been a superb, wonderful interview full of wonderful facts.
Thanks to you, Philippe.
Oh, thank you. So I hope everyone will join us next time for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business. And this has been Philip Auerbach of Auerbach International. Thank you.